Stay tuned to find out the reasons, the perfectly legitimate reasons for you to feel like an imposter. When I give my keynotes on this topic of imposter syndrome, I tell a story and I make a point that first and foremost, imposter syndrome tends to scream the loudest in times of change and transition. And I tell a story about how I was at NASA as a project engineer, was looking to get promoted, and put in an application to be the director of the jet engine research facility at which I was project engineer, and how I felt so unqualified. And it was because it was a time of transition. I was making a change from being just the staff engineer to now the person in management. And so imposter syndrome screams the loudest in times of change. But more than that, there were some other characteristics, some other traits, some other circumstances that fed into my imposter syndrome. As I looked deeper, I started thinking there's a lot more than just a few. There's 20 perfectly legitimate reasons for you to feel like an imposter. So I'm going to quickly go through them today to help you settle down that, like if you feel guilt or shame or shyness or kind of hopeless about having imposter syndrome. There's reasons why you feel it, and they're legitimate. So let's go through them. The first one is from my friend Valerie Young, who is the writer of the book, I see I don't have it here. Oh, there it is up on the scale. The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. She's the one who put imposter syndrome on the map in somewhere around in the 1990s. She is a foremost authority on imposter syndrome, and I've partnered with her as part of the Imposter Syndrome Institute. And this is what she says. She's one of the first reasons, legitimate reasons, is you were raised by humans. We were raised by people, for the most part, that had the best intentions, and they were doing the best they could with what they knew. Now, they were raised by humans, and their humans were raised by humans, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist, lucky for you, in case it does, I am one. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice that nobody is perfect. No child is raised by perfect parents. No parents perfectly parent their children. So yeah, we're going to walk through life with some baggage, and some of that baggage stays with us lifelong. For example, if the second reason is that if you were a child who was praised excessively when you were young, maybe you were praised and pushed to perform to an excessive. You were just constantly pushed. I know I kind of was, and I can't blame it on my parents. I was one of those kids that just, my natural inclination was to just excel. I had to get A's all the time. I remember studying for art tests. Like, how do you study for an art test? Well, it was more art history. We had to memorize paragraphs of information about some of the classic works of art and the artists. And I distinctly remember burning the midnight oil the day before the art test, memorizing huge chunks of paragraphs to not just pass the art test, but to ace the art test. Unfortunately, part of the art test is that we also had to draw something, and yeah, that's not my strength. So yeah, it was that kind of an epic fail. But I felt pushed by myself and sometimes by my parents. I had set the expectation of always excelling, so my parents just perpetuated that. So that was number two. Third reason is that maybe you carry a label from your past. Maybe your family of origin labeled you as the funny one, or the slow one, or the smart one, or the peacekeeper, or the rebel rouser. Anytime we carry a label with us into our adulthood, guess what? That label sticks a long time. Number four, maybe you were supremely talented as a child. You were extraordinarily musically talented. You were a standout athlete. Artistically, you just like were off the chart. You were a savant. You were a child prodigy. And, when you carry that into adulthood and you start to face challenges where, it was great for a child and kind of average for an adult, you start to feel like you don't measure up. Number 5, I actually mentioned this in my previous video. If you have a STEM background, if you come from a science, technology, engineering, and math background, or even as a child, you excelled in science and math. Those were your sweet spots. And then as you get older, you hit things like calculus and linear analysis, and it is not the same as 1 plus 3. You may have excelled at a lower level math and are struggling a little bit in higher level math, and you start to feel like there's I faked it. I've been found out. Today they're going to figure out I'm not a math expert. Number 6, maybe, again, this is another one that I mentioned in my previous video. Maybe you work as a creative or you're in an artistic type creative field. And again, without repeating what I said in the previous video, it's related to not just feeling like you have to wow your previous, not just knowing that you wowed your previous client, but wondering if you have what it takes to wow your next client. Do you have that artistic brilliance still bubbling up within you? Number 7 is if you're a person that has a management or a leadership role in your organization. I was just talking about this at a party a couple of nights ago. Met some new people, fascinating backgrounds, and all of them had come to their particular job from a different industry, and in making the jump from one industry to the next, they also went up the management chain. And they all struggled with the same thing. It's like, it's one thing to move from one industry to another, but to move up the chain, I don't know. I just felt like I had to get my bearings straight. I had to figure out how things worked. But something else interesting, one was a lawyer, one was I can't remember what her past job was, something in the science world. And then there was me, I was an engineer. We all agreed, at least at NASA, we often rewarded technical excellence with a management promotion. It was like the only path into management was you had to rise to the top of the technical expertise and then phew, jump over to the management chain. Talk about setting us up for failure, because guess what? Management leadership skills are not the same as technical expertise skills. And they're not like inherent, they are learned skills. Some of them are personality traits, but for the most part, they're learned skills. The skills simply do not translate. And unfortunately, NASA, and I corroborated it with some of these folks at this party, their organizations were the same thing. They didn't do a lot of pre-training, prepping people to get into those management and leadership roles. So these folks were dying. I mean, they were like flailing in these positions. They eventually figured out, because that's the kind of people that they are. They just figure out how to make it work. But in that transition time from a staff position to a management position, and the higher up you go in the management chain, the more intensely you will feel imposter syndrome. And it could be because there's fewer people around you to camaraderie with or bounce ideas off of, or you just feel like in the culture that you're in, you feel like the higher up you go, the more isolated you need to be. Whatever it is. It's if you're in a management and leadership role, it's legitimate that you would feel like an imposter. Number 8, again, is a repeat from my past video. If you're in a degree, credentialed, certified type of position where you have to either have a degree to get the job, or you have to go through routine certifications, renewals, retesting, you're constantly having to prove your knowledge worth. Who wouldn't feel like an imposter if new requirements come along or new knowledge comes along? Of course, you're going to feel kind of in over your head. Number 9 is something I know I experience like on full tilt volume is if you are part of a group that identifies as a minority or an underrepresented population. It could be gender related, race related, capability related. It could be any kind of situation where you are you feel not part of the bigger picture. I was one of the only women in engineering at Notre Dame. I was one of the only women in the engineering directorate, or the aeronautics directorate at NASA. And when I did get promoted into the management position, I was one of only 3 women in management out of 1,000 people in the aeronautics directorate. So the pressure to represent an entire gender, it's a heavy load. It was a heavy load. So yeah, I'm going to feel like an imposter. But if you're part of another population that is underrepresented, if you don't look, think, sound, act, or dress like the people around you, you're going to feel like you're out of place. Number 10 is if you have made a significant career transition. And again, this is something else I alluded to previously. Anytime you make a transition, imposter syndrome screams the loudest in that transition, whether it's a change from one job to another, one company to another, one industry to another, or if you have a job that is very unpredictable, unscripted, unchoreographed, changes from day to day, the change could simply be, it's a new day. And every day you feel this measure of, do I measure up? Can I do this? What if today is the day I'm uncovered? So those are the first 10 of the 20 legitimate reasons to feel like an imposter. Stay tuned for this next video where I'm going to cover 11 through 20. Stay tuned.